Welcome back to another Bleach Rebirth of Souls video, and in this one we'll be diving deep into the defense mechanics that exist within this game. Whether if you're facing off against opponents online or fighting against the in-game AI, mastering defense is critical if you want the upper hand in this game. There is so much more to Rebirth of Souls than just landing a flashy keycon move. You need to be able to outplay your opponent with smart blocks, dodges and counters. As with most fighters, defense is just as important, or if not more important, than offense. The developers for the game have made sure that you cannot just rely on a single strategy in order to continuously win. You can't just be the type who always attacks, and you can't be somebody who's turtling up in a defense. If the in-game AI is able to easily adapt to your fight patterns, then you can assume that most players online will be able to also. The aim is, by the end of this video, you're going to have a comprehensive defense toolkit that you can use for this game. We'll be looking at perfectly timed sidesteps, backsteps, and how to use the reverse gauge, blue burst escape, and clever counterattacks and reset tricks. Hopefully by breaking down the evasion mechanics, the guard system, and the reverse gauge, as well as the Hoho flash step techniques and more, you'll be able to have a solid defense strategy going into Rebirth of Souls. So yeah, let's find out how to block like Kinpachi and how to dodge and evade moves like Yoruichi. Without further delay, here is my comprehensive defense guide for Bleach Rebirth of Souls. Before we dive into some specific defensive techniques, we need to understand the fundamentals of Rebirth of Souls. At its core, this game operates on a rock, paper, scissors system. So guard beats attack, as this allows you to block and negate regular attacks. Break is able to beat guard, as these guard breaks are able to penetrate an opponent who's constantly guarding. And lastly, you have attack, which beats break. So fast attacks interrupt slower break attempts. So if you do a break, there is a lot of time for you to reset, which allows the opponent to punish you if you haven't landed that break. So this three-way deadlock system means that there isn't a perfect defense system here. You need to read your opponent and choose the right response for any given situation. If you notice your opponent is constantly attacking, then guard is going to be really effective. If your opponent is relying on guard breaks, you'll want to attack first or evade their attack. So understanding this triangle is fundamental to any defensive decisions that you make within Rebirth of Souls. So while fighting in Rebirth of Souls, we are constantly managing several key resources. First is the Reishi gauge. So if this is depleted below 30%, you enter a dangerous Reishi depletion state where opponents are able to destroy your Konpaku. Konpaku are the lives that each person starts with, and they usually begin with 9. If you lose all of them, then it's game over. Following this, you have the guard gauge, and this depletes as you block attacks. If it's emptied, then you enter a guard break state and you cannot defend after that. Now, following this, the last resource you need to pay attention to is the reverse gauge. Now this powers your emergency defensive options like burst reverse and Hoho. So managing these resources is critical. Unlike a lot of other fighters where you only have to worry about a health bar and an energy bar, Rebirth of Souls you need to balance multiple meters at the same time. So if you want to be a great defender in this game, you need to constantly monitor all of the gauges and make decisions that preserve these gauges effectively. So the first mechanic that we'll be looking at is sidestepping. So this is when you use X with the left or right directional. So sidestepping is the primary evasive tool that you have within Rebirth of Souls. I found that sidestepping is effective against projectile attacks like Ichigo's Getsuga Tensho, or linear stab attacks or long range pokes. So this will help you against predictable combo starters. So the key here is timing and direction. Don't just sidestep randomly. So find out which side is going to offer the most space and step at the moment an attack is going to connect. I've won a lot of matches against projectile heavy characters by simply sidestepping at the right moment and punishing their whiffed attacks. So yeah, many players do sidestep in the same direction repeatedly, so do mix up the directions that you're sidestepping in order to avoid becoming too predictable. An experienced player will start using tracking attacks to catch your patterns. So if you're up against an opponent who loves close quarters combat, you can quickly create distance between yourself and them by using the backstep spacing. So this creates quick distance between you and your opponent. While it doesn't have the invincibility of a perfect Hoho dodge, it's a great tool for creating space when you're cornered and for avoiding throws and command grabs. So this makes melee attacks whiff by moving out of the range of the attack, and it resets neutral when you're under pressure. I use backsteps defensively after blocking 2 to 3 hits in a string, especially when my guard gauge is getting low. So this gives time for the guard gauge to recover while also forcing your opponent to approach again, often making them impatient and predictable. Now, you might think that this is counterintuitive, but sometimes moving forward is the best defense. A quick step forward with X can get inside the effective range of a long attack, it can confuse opponents who are expecting you to retreat, and you can close a distance against zoning opponents here. And it can also set you up for your own offense before your opponent can start theirs. I found this useful against characters like Byakuya or Uryu, who rely on keeping you at a distance when they wind up a ranged attack, so a quick forward step can get you inside that effective range, causing that attack to whiff over your head. Remember, movement doesn't always consume your guard gauge or reverse gauge, and you should use blocking as your backup option when evasion isn't possible. So yeah, we've first gone over all of the different movement mechanics so that you know your backstep, sidestep, and your forward approach. These often are not a solid enough for a foundation of defense for Rebirth of Souls. Let's now have a look at the fundamental guarding mechanic. So you guard in the PS5 version with L1. Now, guarding does come with significant limitations that many players overlook. Each time that you block an attack, your guard gauge is going to deplete. Once it's empty, you enter a guard broken state. So you're unable to block and you're vulnerable to massive damage. This means that you can't just hold block forever. From my testing, different attacks deplete your guard gauge at different rates, so using light quick attacks deplete it slowly, but heavy flash attacks really do damage to the guard gauge. Or these breaker attacks with this pink aura can severely damage it or break it outright. So yeah, the guard gauge regenerates slowly when you're not blocking, so I do recommend pulse blocking only when attacks are coming rather than holding block. This allows your guard gauge to recover between attack strings, and this is why this game has that three-way deadlock system. You can't just block your way to victory in this game, you're going to have to use attack, block, and break. Now, not everything in Bleach Rebirth of Souls can be blocked. Every character has breaker moves, and these are identified by a pink aura, and these serve like a grab, so you go to your opponent's guard and you break it with the R1 button. There are also soul destroying techniques, so when your opponent's ratio is below 30%, attacks usually can't be blocked, and these guard breakers are going to come really in handy. So when you see that pink aura of a breaker, you can attack first against your opponent, as breakers are slow, so often or not a quick attack like a quick jab interrupts a breaker. You can also sidestep and evade the breaker entirely, or you can use a burst reverse in order to escape your opponent's breaker. There is another option where opponents are able to parry your breaker if they also hit the breaker button at the same time, so it works as a great way to just quickly neutralize a break. I noticed that many players do panic where their guard breaks, so they mash buttons and they take even more damage instead of focusing on emergency evasion. So you need to backstab repeatedly or use your reverse gauge for a reverse burst in order to escape from your opponent. So rather than blocking reactively, what you need to do is anticipate when you're going to need to guard. So try to block after performing unsafe moves which leave you vulnerable, and block when an opponent dash approaches you, as they are likely going to try to start a combo. Also block the first hit of known strings and then look for openings to escape from your opponent. You can also release block between attack strings in order to regenerate your guard gauge. So just remember the three-way system of Rebirth of Souls. If you suspect a breaker is coming, attack or evade is better than blocking. Guard is used for attack strings, not for break attempts. Now we're moving on to the reverse system. Now this is your emergency get the hell off me button. So the reverse system in Rebirth of Souls is your lifeline when defense is going wrong. So use your reverse gauge, which is below the yellow meter, in order to activate powerful defensive options. First you have burst reverse, which is L2 and square. Now this is your emergency escape, as when this is activated it emits a blue shockwave that knocks your opponent back, and it immediately ends any combo that you're stuck in. Now this also restores a portion of your guard gauge, and it gives you a moment to reset your neutral. This is invaluable, especially if you're caught in a damaging combo or if you're about to lose a Konpaku. So however, if you only have 2 or 3 reverse stocks available, timing is crucial, as you don't want to waste the reverse action on minor damage. Save it for a situation where you're about to lose a Konpaku, or your opponent has you in a long high damage combo, or if you're concerned with low guard gauge, and lastly if you're about to eat a Konpaku destroying Kikon move. Now through online matches I have noticed a bit of a pattern. Inexperienced players burst immediately when caught in any combo, while people who know what they are doing save their burst for a threatening situation. So play like somebody who's experienced and don't just use your burst reverse recklessly. Next up we have the Hoho or flash step mechanic. Now, Hoho represents the peak of defensive mobility in Rebirth of Souls, so using your reverse gauge you can perform flash steps, so when timed correctly they completely evade attacks and they set up devastating counters against your opponent. The standard Hoho instantly teleports you behind your opponent from any distance, and the cost is 1 reverse gauge stock, but it gets you out of corners and it repositions you advantageously, and it confuses opponents who lose track of you, and it's great for escaping zoning pressure. I regularly use this basic Hoho against projectile spammers, as when they fire from across the screen a quick Hoho puts me right behind them before they can recover from their animation. Now a perfect dodge or a timed Hoho is where Hoho becomes truly powerful. You activate this at the exact moment an enemy attack is about to hit you, then time briefly slows down as you teleport behind the opponent as they're left vulnerable in their recovery frames, and you can get a free counter hit opportunity. So this is where everything slows down and you see your character appear behind your opponent, and this really cool cutscene begins. Now, to do a perfect timed Hoho, it requires a lot of practice. In training mode, I spent a bit of time mastering the timing against common attacks. Now I can consistently perfect dodge predictable moves like Ichigo's third slash or Byakuya's petal burst. Different attacks have different timing windows, so practice against various characters in order to learn when to activate your Hoho for each attack type. I advise you to generally activate the Hoho just as the attack animation reaches its hit point, as this will allow you to have that timed Hoho moment. Now a Hoho can also be executed during your own combo, as you'll walk behind your opponent to continue your string from another angle. While primarily this is an offensive option, this can also function defensively by repositioning you if you're being pushed towards a corner, or you can continually pressure an opponent who's trying to escape you, or you can mix up your attack patterns to prevent counterattacks. The versatility of Hoho makes it worth spending some time to master it, as a well-timed flash step makes you feel like a true Shinigami, as you disappear from danger and appear behind your opponent in an instant. Now, each character also has their own unique defensive options, as some characters have different unique countermeasures which can completely nullify attacks, and these are typically activated via spiritual pressure moves, which are often L2 and triangle. When activated, your character enters a counter stance briefly. If the opponent hits you during this window, their attack is negated and you automatically counterattack. For example, Byakuya might create a shield of cherry blossoms, Yoruichi might prepare a lightning counter, Soifon might ready a precision strike, or Urahara might use Benihime in order to create a shield. Now these counters are high risk but high reward, as if your prediction is correct you take no damage and you get a free hit. If you're wrong, then you're left vulnerable during recovery frames. I found counters to be most effective against predictable attack patterns, so opponents who always use the same approach, or opponents who have slow telegraphed power moves. There's just a psychological edge to landing counters which is really significant, as opponents become hesitant to attack you, and this gives you control of the match's pace. Defense in Rebirth of Souls isn't just about reactions, it's about prediction. Throughout the matches that I've had, I've developed some strategies for reading opponents, so most players fall into patterns without realizing it. So watch if they always attack after blocking. Do they use the same combo starter when approaching? Do they respond to pressure with a specific defense option? Or do they use breakers after certain moves? Once you identify these patterns, then you can prepare the perfect counter before they even start their move. So for example, if they always use a breaker after you block their 3-hit string, be ready with a quick attack to interrupt it. Another important thing is to have some gauge awareness. Look at your opponents and your own gauge. If their reverse gauge is empty, they can't burst out of your combos. If their guard gauge is low, they'll be hesitant to block. If their reishi is below 30%, they'll likely play more cautiously. If they've just awakened, expect some more aggressive gameplay. Just having this awareness lets you adjust your defensive strategy accordingly. So for instance, if I notice an opponent has no reverse gauge, I know that they can't escape my combos or use Hoho, so I can be more aggressive without fear of counterburst. In order to practice your defensive skills, go into training mode and set the CPU to repeatedly use a specific attack. Practice sidestepping it consistently, and also practice perfecting your Hoho timing against it. Gradually increase the difficulty by having the CPU mix up its attacks. This will help you to really develop your defensive skills. Spend at least 10 to 15 minutes on this drill daily until you become an expert at evasion. You can also set the CPU to use heavy guard breaking moves. You can practice blocking the first hit and then backstepping before your guard breaks. Alternatively, practice using burst reverse at the optimal moment and learn to recognize when your guard is about to break from the visual cues. This teaches you to manage your guard gauge under pressure. Also, in training mode, you're able to record the CPU performing common attack strings so you can identify where there are gaps in these attack strings, practice interrupting them with your fastest attack during these gaps. Learn which strings are true combos, which are uninterruptible, and which have openings. So here you can practice your long multiple hit combos where you can start getting into the 10+ hits. Now there are also some character specific defense tips. Different opponents require different defensive approaches. Here are strategies against popular characters. So against Ichigo, sidestepping his Getsuga Tensho rather than blocking it will save your guard gauge. Ichigo's third slash in his string of combos is often unsafe, so you can counter after blocking it. When Ichigo enters Bankai, expect faster approaches, so be ready to block low. Against Byakuya, his petal projectiles track moderately, so double sidestep to fully evade them. When he creates his petal sphere, backstep to maximum range, and his grab has slow startup, so you can interrupt it with a quick attack. When you're up against Kinpachi, don't try to trade hits. His damage output is way too high. His attacks have wide range but slow recovery, so focus on punishing him when he whiffs. Now save your burst for his charged attacks, as they can deplete multiple Kompaku from Kinpachi. So overall, defense in Rebirth of Souls isn't just about surviving, it's about controlling the flow of battle. You gotta master movement, understand when to block, use the reverse gauge, and strategically read your opponent's intentions, as you transform from an open target to an unbreakable wall of defense. Remember, perfect defense is active and not passive. You're constantly going to be needing to make decisions while you're playing, manage your resources, and look for opportunities to turn defense into offense. The most satisfying wins in this game come not from overwhelming your opponent with offense, but from frustrating your opponent with superior defensive play until they make critical mistakes. So yeah, this is my complete defense guide for BLEACH Rebirth of Souls. Let me know all of your thoughts, and if there's anything that I've forgotten to mention, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Rebirth of Souls video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.